As the Russian army is quickly learning in Ukraine, tanks are not really meant for urban combat. They were historically used solely for longer range engagements. The simple reason for that is that the most effective military unit to use in cities is infantry. So I'm sorry if you thought you could send 1,000 tanks to a city and expect to take it easily. But what if you could? What if, somewhere out there was a video game in which infantry did not exist, where tanks reigned supreme even in the densest urban areas? Welcome to War Thunder. Here are several tips for close quarters combat and examples from my gameplay. Tip number 1. Don't rush the capture points. Sure, there are several extremely fast vehicles in the game that can capture points as soon as the match starts, and doing so can be an easy way to earn quick cash. However, in most situations, it is better to go to a spot between two capture points or along the edge of the map, as the enemy will most likely not expect you to come from that direction. You can see that in this game, while most of my teammates are rushing capture zones, I'm heading in between the A and the B points. Crucially, I'm traveling through an area without direct line of sight to the A or B points, so enemies who travel to those points will not be able to see or shoot me. Tip number 2. Always look around. You can see me in this video repeatedly looking around, especially when I cross a road. Although it is still quite early in the match, it is entirely possible that a fast-wheeled vehicle managed to get this far into the map and may get a side shot on me if I'm not looking. Remember kids, always look both ways before you cross a road. Tip number 3. Fire on the move. Firing on the move can be tricky at longer ranges, but it's a perfectly viable strategy at close range, and should be your go-to option. Many players will slam the brakes when they make contact with an enemy, which will cause your gun to swing up and down and make it difficult to shoot the enemy until you come to a complete stop. A much better strategy is to simply keep moving and avoid hitting the brakes altogether, as I've done in this video. Your gun will still jerk around as you move, but it's much easier to control when in constant motion than when braking. Learning to fire on the move rather than applying brakes will save you countless times in close range combat, as it allows you to get the first shot off on the enemy. Once again, after I kill this guy, you can see me looking around. I typically hold the C key when I look around, because that will prevent your turret from turning to the direction you're looking. Helpful if you want to keep your turret facing forward. Tip number 4. Flank, flank, flank. This tip applies to every tank in the game with a turret, and if your tank doesn't have a turret, then you really shouldn't be using it in close range. Every tank in the game has stronger frontal armor than side armor, and side shots are much more likely to be one-hit kills, as most tanks store their ammunition on the sides. I know this Sherman has just fired, and my next shot will certainly reload faster than his. In theory, I could just sit here in front of him and fire at him again once my shot is reloaded. My tank, the T-34, is capable of penetrating a Sherman's frontal armor in certain weak spots. But there is still a small chance that I miss the weak spot, the Sherman somehow manages to reload faster than me, or my second shot fails to take out his gunner, allowing him to shoot me back. A much safer option in this particular situation is, rather than hitting the brakes, continuing to drive forward, using my momentum, and taking advantage of the Sherman's slow turret traverse to get around to his side, denying him the shot on me and giving me an easy side shot on the Sherman's turret. Flanking is certainly easier to do with medium or light tanks, but it can still be accomplished with a heavy tank or a turreted tank destroyer. Tip number 5. Peek corners with angled armor. Notice how when I peek this corner, and almost every other corner I peek this match, I do it with my frontal armor at an extreme angle. That's the main reason the Sherman I encountered earlier didn't penetrate me with the first shot. Angled armor is better at blocking shells than flat armor, and most players will typically shoot the frontal hull of a tank with their first shot. By angling the front hull, I prevent them from penetrating me with that first shot. The disadvantage of angling your armor is that it exposes your side, and in the case of the T-34, my side armor is very weak. However, you can use the corner you are peeking to cover your side armor, and as long as your side armor is angled enough, the enemy players will typically avoid shooting there. Another useful tip for peeking corners in the third-person view is looking into the corner you peek with your third-person camera. This allows you to see what's beyond the corner without exposing your tank. Unfortunately, this technique does not work in simulator battles because third-person view is disabled. Tip number 6. Wiggle. This tip may seem a little silly and definitely annoy the crap out of a lot of players, but the fact is, this strategy actually works. Wiggling your entire tank or even just your turret a little bit side to side makes it harder for the enemy to aim at your weak spots as they're constantly jiggling around, causing them to either miss the weak spot or take a slightly longer time to aim. This under-tiered Stuart tank was unlikely to frontally penetrate a T-34 anyway, but there's no harm in a little bit of wiggling. Tip number 7. Repairs can wait. This Sherman 76 has taken out my turret ring and killed my gunner and loader. Since I'm unable to fire anyway without a gunner, should I just sit there and repair with my strong frontal armor facing him, hoping he doesn't penetrate me? Absolutely not! My tank is still fully functional without the turret ring, and one of the other crew members will soon take the gunner position, allowing me to fire again. The best course of action right now is to use my brief moment of opportunity when the Sherman is reloading, and once again take advantage of its slow turret traverse, going around it and preventing it from getting a shot on me. Basically, I'm going to dance around him. Tip number 8. Make use of dead bodies. As weird as it is, other people's dead tanks are some of the best cover you can find in the game, because they have really weird shaped hitboxes. You can see that the weird hitbox even confused me at first, as I missed my first shot at the M10. I'm going to come back to the topic of dead bodies, but first I'm going to mention sidescraping. Tip number 8.5 is sidescraping. The M10 has very high penetration, and I know it will cut through my armor like paper. However, if it hits my armor at a steep enough angle, it's not even going to get the chance to penetrate, and will simply bounce off before it can. By covering my unangled frontal armor and turret with the dead body, and showing only my steeply angled side armor to the M10, I managed to bait a shot onto my side armor, which harmlessly ricochets off even though the armor there is only 45mm thick. All armor-piercing cells in the game will harmlessly ricochet when fired at armor at such an extreme angle, even if the shell has a high penetration value or the armor is thin. Now, I'm going to go into gunner view, which moves my view camera to the end of my tank's gun barrel, allowing me to shoot at the M10 through the dead body, exposing very little of my own tank. Use dead bodies in this way and you will be unkillable. Bonus points if it's the dead body of a tank you destroyed. Now that the enemy tanks have been dealt with, I'm going to head behind a building to finally repair that turret ring that the Sherman destroyed earlier. I'll turn off my engine to avoid it making noise and alerting people of my location while I'm busy repairing. I realize that I'm just outside of the enemy spawn, but since I'm not shooting people as soon as they spawn and killing them before their PC even loads into the game, I don't think this technically counts as spawn camping. Feel free to write a comment about what a cancerous spawn camper I am though, it helps the YouTube algorithm. Tip number 9. Use headphones. Tanks are really loud. They have massive engines strapped to their rears, which make more noise than the fart you accidentally let out during that interview. If you play War Thunder without headphones and directional hearing, you are playing at a disadvantage. I actually heard this tank over here before I saw him, since my eyes were focused on the enemy spawn, the direction from which I was expecting an enemy to come. Luckily, hearing him early gave me the advanced warning I needed to reignite my engine and turn my tank around to face him. In hindsight, I should have been listening a bit more carefully, because my reaction time was a bit slow, and I couldn't get my tank turned around fast enough to face him. Fortunately, this guy didn't expect there to be an enemy tank this close to his spawn, especially considering the game situation, and just drives past me without ever realizing. Before anyone complains that I got really lucky or that this guy is just retarded, remember that I'm really far behind enemy lines, and that most players don't bother to look around much when driving deep within their own territory. The other PvKV off in the distance also didn't think it was possible that there was an enemy tank this close to its spawn, but I struggled to aim my gun and kill the first PvKV due to my damaged turret ring, so I let the second PvKV escape unharmed. It isn't actually me who kills the first PvKV, it's my teammate, but I'm grateful for his help even though I probably could have dealt with it on my own. I stop and repair my turret ring right there in the open field, which is a terrible idea and will probably get you killed if you do it this close to the enemy spawn. I had no choice, however, since my engine was destroyed and I couldn't move into cover. A Panzer IV comes out of enemy spawn and has no trouble spotting my bright red tank sitting out in the open. Fortunately, my turret ring and engine get repaired just in time. I swing around my turret to get the shot and I begin wiggling my tank, praying that he either shoots my side and the shell ricochets off, or he hits my engine but fails to disable my gunner and allows me to fire back at him. This tank could have killed me easily if only he had followed this next tip. Tip number 10. Disable the gunner first. If this Panzer IV had shot my turret at this moment, I would have either been knocked out of the match or unable to fire, allowing him to get a second shot on me. However, he is tempted by my exposed side armor and goes for a shot on the side of my hull, which bounces off. I highly recommend that if you ever find yourself directly behind the enemy tank, shoot its turret, not the hull. The side armor will be too angled to penetrate, and a shot to the rear might only take out the engine, and the enemy tank will still have the capability to fire back at you. It is true that turret shots will often fail to take out a tank in a single hit, but at least it is almost guaranteed to disable the enemy tank's ability to fire if it penetrates. If anyone's confused as to what is a turret and what is a hull, this part of the tank is the turret and this part is the hull. All tanks have hulls, but not all tanks have turrets. If the tank you are fighting against has no turret, disregard this next piece of advice. What I advise you to do as a default in any situation when facing an enemy vehicle at close range is always shoot at the enemy's turret unless the enemy turret armor is very thick, such as in the Tiger 1 or in the case of most MBTs. You are facing the tank side on and you have APHE shells allowing you to one-shot the tank with a side-on hull shot, or you are facing the tank frontally and you are 100% confident that your shell will penetrate the frontal hull. Anyway, this guy doesn't watch my videos, so he shoots my hull, which does nothing, while I aim for his turret with my next shot, disabling his gunner. I will admit that this game has been pretty lucky so far. Not all your games will be like this. Sometimes you will just get unlucky. I often get games where I die really quick, and it is frustrating. The important thing though is that you learn from your mistakes and follow these tips to increase your chances of winning an engagement. I'm going to use tip number 3 and fire on the move rather than braking. I flub my shot, but I have momentum behind me and I use it to swerve behind a building before the enemy could get a shot off on me. I'm once again going to fire on the move when I encounter a Largo 1, then employ tip number 4 and flank the Panzer IV. I knew that he was circling the building, just as I was, because I could hear him off to my left, but I'm going to continue circling anyway because tip number 11, know your enemy. This isn't really something that you can immediately implement in your gameplay. You can't learn how to fight every tank in War Thunder in a day. Of course, if you really want to, you can head over to the War Thunder wiki and memorize every statistic of every vehicle in the game, but most of us don't have time for that. This is a skill that kinda just comes with experience. I have spent way too many hours playing War Thunder and fighting Panzer IVs, so I know for a fact that the T-34 is faster than the Panzer IV, and if we keep circling around like this, eventually I'm gonna catch up to him. The more you play, the more you learn about the tanks you fight, and the more you learn about their weaknesses and how to exploit them. Just like how I earlier exploited the Sherman's slow turret traverse, and am now taking advantage of the Panzer IV's slow speed. In this game, the Panzer IV gets taken out by a teammate, but even if my teammate hadn't killed it, I would have had no trouble getting the kill. The rest of the game is not that interesting. I just go into enemy spawn for a bit and get killed by a guy with spawn protection, which is honestly what I deserve after attempting to spawn camp them. I get a couple more kills in an aircraft and a tank, and our team wins the game. I hope you liked the video and found these tips useful. Comment down below if you disagree with me on anything or want to suggest a few additional tips of your own. Cheerio!